And certainly, my whole career as a chef, I never thought I'd be without a job, basically. And that's sort of what it come down to, and, so everything I've done for the last, 35 years, I was no longer able to do it. And I think the hard thing about that was that no one really knew when and if it was going to come back.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. I've been a food journalist for 20 years, and during that time, the old claim that fine dining is dead has surfaced pretty much every single one of them. When the pandemic hit, many operators suggested that the road to recovery was through everyday heartwarming eats, and that fine dining may have finally had its day. But as we start to look through COVID, we're sharing a common belief that life is short and nothing is forever. As such, will fine dining actually experience a golden era? Peter Gilmore is the executive chef of Quay. Peter, how are you going?
Good, Anthony. Nice to be here.
Peter, I don't know if you remember, but the very first contact that we ever had, I didn't have any grey hair and I was a young editor of Food Service magazine at the time, and I think I'd printed something wrong about your departure from De Beers Whale Beach many moons ago. And you left a message on my answering machine in a deep voice, probably scared the hell out of a young journalist at the time. But we've both had long careers since then, and certainly the journey of Quay is absolutely extraordinary. I think the most awarded Australian restaurant ever. What's that journey been like of the restaurant?
Yeah, it has been a journey, quite an incredible one, really, when I think about it. I mean, I've been at Quay now. In August, it'll be 19 years. And I think, the journey for me obviously starts back when I was an apprentice at 16. And, I never sort of thought that I'd end up where I have. I guess the reason I got into cooking was I just had this passion for it, and it actually hasn't ever waned. It's got stronger, I think, over the years. And, it has been a journey, mate.
Where did that passion come from, like so young, to enter the industry? Why did you love food so much?
Yeah, it's interesting. My dad was actually a display artist, a window display artist in menswear, and they also owned a couple of menswear stores. And so it was probably assumed that I would go into that business. But my mum is just an incredibly good cook and was always entertaining at home. And I just gravitated towards it. I loved it. And I think if I remember rightly, it was probably at a couple of different dinner parties or parties they had that I remember her cooking in the kitchen and her getting me to, pass things around to the guests and just that whole sort of people enjoying what you've just created. I think I just got hooked, and I used to always want to cook the barbecue and push my dad out of the way. Let me do it. He would only burn the steaks anyway, so.
Well, I can't imagine you burning a steak.
No. Well, I didn't, so he let me do it. But look, I think that's where it all started, and at school in year 10, I did work experience in a good restaurant at the time in Sydney. It was called the Manor House in Balmain, and I was 6 months later. The head chef rang me up and offered me an apprenticeship, and so I left school in year 10, halfway through year 10 actually, and started my apprenticeship. So it's been with me all these years.
Well, that's a long time ago, and you've created, arguably, one of Australia's greatest restaurants ever, and you've won global awards. You've won Best Chef. It's won Best Restaurant multiple times. An extraordinary run of 3 hats year after year after year. What are some of the pressures involved in a restaurant of this caliber?
Yeah, it is there. It's always there in the background. The idea of sort of like potentially losing a hat, or not getting a good review, or But at the end of the day, I think the reason why I do it is because I'm still excited by by food, by the creative process, particularly. And I just sort of always had the sort of inclination not to rest on my laurels, just to keep pushing when it comes to creating cuisine. And I think my style's evolved, quite a few times over the years. I know around, 2008, 2009, I was probably one of the first chefs in Australia, if not, a handful in the world, really to sort of embrace the garden and, heirloom vegetables and herbs and flowers and all that sort of stuff. So, and that was just purely out of my personal interest. And, I remember at the time the El Bulli molecular stuff was, sort of like the current sort of, trend. And I just sort of personally just didn't like it. I thought it was clever, but it just didn't resonate with me. And so I sort of focused more and more on the organic look and feel of the food. And I also started gardening at that point in 2008. And by 2000, I think it was 2010, 2011, we're in the world's top 50 restaurant list. And, back to back sort of Good Food Guide Restaurant of the Year and Gourmet Traveller Restaurant of the Year. And, I also released my book Quay. And I don't know, it's just, I guess I was probably following my passion, but as it turned out, it was a little bit ahead of the curve. And that sort of organic and approach where you looked at nature and the garden and, and right through to, sort of more organic plates. Back then it was all white, shiny plates and now it's all, handmade rustic plates. And that was just because it was my passion, my direction. It's been a ride, that's for sure, mate.
Well, just talking of plates and how that's changed. The last time that I ate at Quay, there's a dish that I always remember, which was that rock pool and that stunning sort of bowl with the, seafood that you'd got that morning, and it was just extraordinary. But what's the creative process behind your dishes when you're playing at that level?
A lot of it comes back to the produce itself, and wanting to respect it and do something that's within keeping of the actual ingredients. In that particular dish, we had this amazing little tiny octopus that was sort of basically hand caught in traps down in Coffin Bay in Venus Bay down South Australia, and it was sashimi grade octopus. It was amazing, beautiful, incredible hand harvested scallops, all of that sort of thing. And it's just like you want to honour that. And I guess then, you look at different techniques, you look at flavour profiles, you look at texture combinations. And texture's always been a really big thing for me. And, so honouring something like that, just dressing it very simply in, the finest, 10-year-old soy, beautiful aged black vinegar, a little bit of grapeseed oil, some seaweed, and then, the garnish changed a little bit. We started off with some fresh lotus seeds, and then we went to palm heart as a textural component, and sort of just builds, really. It's sort of a process. You start down one rabbit hole and you end up somewhere else usually.
When you build a restaurant, over so many years like you have, and the expectations, and set such a mean standard, what's it like when something like a pandemic comes along? And did you question the future of fine dining and what you were doing at Quay and even chefing?
Yeah. Look, it was certainly a huge kick in the guts for the whole industry worldwide, really. I mean, no one could see this sort of thing coming, and certainly, in my whole career as a chef, I never thought I'd be without a job, basically, and that's sort of what it come down to, and so everything I've done for the last 35 years, I was no longer able to do it, and I think the hard thing about that was that no one really knew when and if it was going to come back. That's the thing that just sort of, I think, was the hardest thing about it. And I think, the first week or so that I was, that we'd closed Quay and closed Bennelong, I just sort of I don't know. I was sort of in shock, I think, to be honest. And then, the funny thing sort of happens that you just sort of like, I've always been a very optimistic person. And I guess I just felt, well, look, this can't last forever. But I mean, as it's turned out, Australia has done an incredibly amazing job controlling the pandemic and getting back on track. I mean, compared to most countries around the world, we're really ahead of the game. We were thinking at least 6 months being closed originally, and then, as it turns out, it was 3 months, almost to the day that we reopened.
What did you do during that period, during that 3 months? While you didn't have a restaurant, because I know how hard you work and that it's really your kind of life's work. What's it feel like when that's no longer there, and what have you been doing?
Well, I think I was a bit lost really for the first week or so, and we made the decision early on that it wasn't really going to work for us to try and sort of go to takeaway. I think a neighbourhood type of restaurant is probably more able to do that. But, the size of Quay and the size of Bennelong and their locations, it just didn't make sense on paper. It would have been a drop in the ocean. We're very fortunate the government come along and introduced JobKeeper, and we were able to look after most of our staff, which was, really important. But, for the first week or so, we didn't really know what was happening there either. But I think once we knew that was in place for a few months, it was we breathed a little bit easier, that's for sure. But personally, I don't know, I just, obviously I love gardening. I got into my gardening at home, started doing all the sort of jobs that I've been neglecting for the last 10 years around the house. Actually painted the outside of the house.
Wow.
And discovered bushwalking and things like that. And just in the last 6 weeks before we went back, I made the decision to ask one of my ceramic friends, a guy called Paul Davis, who actually made that beautiful rockpool bowl that you're talking about. Asked him if I could borrow some clay, and he offered me to have a lend of one of his old wheels. So I set up in the garage and I started making ceramics, which I absolutely love. It's so good.
Are they good enough to appear in Quay?
Oh, not quite yet. But, the thing is, mate, I've been involved with ceramic artists really going back to, I think it was like 2008, 2009. I first approached Paul to make bowls for Quay. And, so for a lot of years I've been, sketching and designing shapes and looking at glazes and colours and working with Paul and other artists like Malcolm Greenwood and Ben Richardson down in Tasmania. But, and Paul and Jackie Clayton up in Newcastle, Paul's been my sort of guy from the beginning, and just loving what he does. So I turned my hand to that, which was pretty interesting. Like I had a little go at it in my early 20s, but I just didn't realise how much I'd enjoy it, and it's very therapeutic actually working with clay. It's great.
You might have to do the rosters in future and make sure you get the days off to continue this new hobby.
Yeah, well, I definitely will on my days off. It's all set up in the garage now, and we'll see how we go. But what has been actually interesting is working with clay, and I did a lot of hand building and sort of more. It's almost more like sculpture, and I sort of when I approached the menu when we had to come back, and we actually only had a couple of weeks' notice that we're actually going to be able to start back up in June. We sort of figured it would probably be July or August. So so then I started having to think about ideas, and it's just working with clay. My dishes sort of changed a little again. I mean, they've always been quite textural, but I sort of felt they were becoming a little bit more sculptural. I was just looking at the shapes and the form a little bit differently as well.
Has this experience changed what you think you'll do at Quay with food moving forward?
Look, it's hard to say. I mean, there's a lot of speculation out there that the pandemic mean that, like you said at the beginning of this, that fine dining would die. But as you also said, they've been saying that almost every year for the last 15 years. So it's a funny thing, isn't it? And I think I actually said to a journalist the other day, I said, well, look, if that's true, what you're actually saying is that creative food is dead. That, you know, pushing the boundaries with directions and flavors and textures and is also dead, because if what you're actually saying is that everyone just wants to eat wood-fired pizza and hamburgers, well, I love great wood-fired pizza too, but not every day. Once in a blue moon, if I've got something really special to celebrate, or I just feel like indulging, I want to go and have a creative meal, and I want to see what the kitchen's come up with and what directions the cuisine's moving in, And to be honest, it's very hard for that to happen anywhere else than fine dining. And fine dining is actually a funny word too these days. What does that actually mean, I think that dining in general all over the world in top restaurants has become a lot more casual, a lot more sort of professional and focused on integrity and focused on ingredients. But to buy amazing ingredients, to support incredible farmers that produce really beautiful products, that costs money. So, you've got to also be prepared to pay for it and charge for it. So, to say that fine dining is dead is to say that imaginative food, we've stopped where we are now. That's it. Or that's not even possible anymore because it's too expensive. And I don't really think it is, to be honest. I mean, I look at it. My wife, the other day went and had a haircut and a colour, and it was the same cost as a great meal at Quay. Really, I mean, it's incredibly cheap what we do. The margins are so slim, so small at the top level. You'd be really surprised, and I think that's because we love what we do and we want to be able to do it, and we want people to enjoy it. In some respects. Fine dining in Australia is incredibly reasonable, considering the amount of labour, the cost of the ingredients, and all the research and development that goes into it, let alone the rents of a beautiful venue like Quay Bennelong.
Well, it's a really interesting time, isn't it? Because, operators, as you're saying, it's really slim margins they're dealing with. And what we're starting to see is a lot of tasting menus and a lot of longer menus so that they can control costs and get, a higher average spend. And I think what consumers have realised is that they really appreciate those special occasions. And as you were saying, that's where fine dining excels.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you feel like that there's actually a great opportunity from these circumstances for a new dawn and realisation of the joy of finer dining?
Yeah, look, I think that I think the industry does need to have a really good hard look at how we operate, and because the margins are so slim, even in the best of times, it's so easy to go under. And I think we need to work out a slightly fairer system when it comes to sort of the costs that are involved, and I don't know whether that means higher prices or whether it means that we look at the industry as a whole when it comes to sort of the award rates and the penalty rates and everything else that is so convoluted. I think something has to give somewhere, because if people do want to have that great experience, it's a very expensive experience to produce. I mean, we do it and we love it. I love the creative side of it. All the people that work in my kitchen love what they do, and it'd be a shame to see that not work. And I do think there's a huge need for it. I mean, look, we reopened and we weren't sure what was going to happen with the bookings, what the response would be like. We decided to open just 4 days a week, Thursday through to Sunday, do 4 dinners and 2 lunches. And within the first 3 days, we were almost booked out for 6 weeks. So,
Wow.
yeah, I know it really surprised and encouraged and made you feel like, wow, people do really love what we do. And I think there was a lot of angst out there, like people really wanted to get out. I had so many people that I saw last week in the dining room that told me that they had an anniversary or a birthday a couple of months ago and they weren't able to go out. And so they decided just to delay it. And as soon as they heard we were open, they booked. So that's really, really encouraging, mate. And, and there's people that just, don't mind spending a little bit of money because they want to have that experience. And even if it's something you do once a year or once every couple of years, it's something that you're going to remember. We are in the business of making memories and giving people experiences that are out of the ordinary. And I think that's pretty special. I think people are going to keep wanting to do that. And it's not just about people that have a lot of money. People, often a lot of people that come to Quay actually save up for quite a while to come and have that experience, and it's something special.
A little earlier you said that you only sort of had 3 weeks' notice to, get the band back together. What's it like? What's it been like, with the team back together and the process of getting that menu to the level and standard that you like?
Yeah. Well, what's really interesting is that we've pretty much got back the majority of our team. Well, certainly all of our full-time chefs. Pretty much every single one of them have come back. So I think the fact that I had a kitchen that knew my food, knew the process, knew the kitchen, it certainly helped. So it wasn't like reopening a restaurant after months of renovation like we did a year and a half ago. We ended up having to employ a lot of new chefs, so that was really difficult. With Bennelong's opening, that was almost a brand new kitchen bar to two chefs. So that was a Herculean task. Really, it was incredible. So this coming back was a lot easier in the sense that I had a team that was really eager to get back in the kitchen, really versed in what we do. The hard thing, or not the hard thing, but the thing, I always want to try and push the boundaries a little bit, and I really wanted to come back with a few new dishes. And it would have been easy just to come back with, the ones we created just before we left. But, I wanted to push the boundaries a bit. So we got into the kitchen, and I think having that break was really interesting for me personally. It just, the idea sort of flowed. I've got another 3 or 4 things in the wings that I want to play around with. So it was a really a creative moment of celebration, really, to be back, and everyone felt it. Like everyone in the kitchen felt it. That everyone was so happy, really, to be doing what they love doing, and to have that idea that what you've trained for, you're able to do it again, and it's pretty cool. It's pretty special.
Producers have always been an important part of what you do, and you sort of mentioned earlier about being one of the first chefs to have the kitchen garden and that connection to produce. How have you seen them impacted, and what do you think the future holds for them on the other side of the pandemic?
Yeah, well, that was also a huge concern when this hit. And, luckily in some ways, not all producers, but some producers that I work with were able to sort of flip their business a little bit. And there's a lot of the people who grow, beautiful vegetables and stuff. They were able to sort of look at sort of doing, vegetable boxes, community vegetable boxes. And there was actually a pretty big demand for it because people were at home, they were cooking a lot more. And they wanted great produce. So, a couple of my guys like Newcastle Greens and the guys Epicurean Harvest up in the Blue Mountains, they went to producing vegetable boxes, and I think for the first month or two there was some pretty interesting vegetables in those boxes that they'd been planning to grow for me. So that was sort of a bit of a challenge, and sort of I think a little bit of education went along with what the vegetables are and what they do with them, and so they actually did okay. It wasn't easy, I don't think, and I think a lot of them probably had just scaled down their operation because they were supplying not just us but a lot of restaurants in Sydney and over the whole country. So, but I think now that restaurants are coming back, the first thing I did was get on the phone to a lot of those guys and say, okay, well, it looks like we're back. Let's start planning for spring. So yeah, I mean, look, some of the specialty stuff on the ground when we first got back was pretty thin on the ground. There wasn't a lot of micro leaves and different flowers and vegetables and things that we'd been growing. They weren't available, but they soon will be again. And and in a way, it sort of forced me to sort of look at the food in a different way and look at the primary ingredients even in more sort of detail and more simplicity in some respects, but still not edging out any quality at all. Just working with different ingredients in a slightly different way, and that was interesting too. Sort of like, well, I can't get this, but what can I get, and what can I make work, and that sometimes leads to really, really interesting creative options.
During your time off painting the house and making sculptures and going on bushwalks, what did you miss most about the restaurant while it was closed?
Yeah, the thing I realised, I think, two things. One is that I think we all invest quite a lot of self-worth in what we do, and that was a little bit strange, not being able to do, have that creative outlet. But the bigger thing, I think, for me was just really missing the interconnection and the relationships of all the people I work with. You sort of almost take it for granted sometimes, those relationships. And I think that the thing that really hit me was just how incredibly connected we are, even beyond the restaurant, but as a society as a whole. How reliant we are on each other for what we do, and for the whole thing to work, and that really struck me, and it also struck me that the relationships that you have through your work are really a big part of your life. They're like an extended family in a lot of ways, and and just to value those relationships more, I think is something that I was feeling and thinking while I was away. Reaching out to colleagues within the industry, within Australia and also around the world, just to see how they were going. We're like that, cliche, we're all in this together, but we literally were, so it's, it was a good time for reflection. I mean, look, I'm pretty positive about the future. I think we'll get on top of this thing. I mean, we have in Australia. I think we will. Hopefully we all learn a little bit from this experience too, that we are reliant on each other, and how important, valuing everyone's contribution is.
With, Australia doing so well in sort of dealing with this pandemic, and we're starting to open up again, but there's other countries in the world that are really having difficult times, and restaurants that can't actually see a time when they can open. You have plenty of friends across the world in the industry. Do you have concerns for them? Have you spoken to some of those guys, and how are they feeling?
Yeah, look, internationally, a lot of my colleagues, everyone's at different stages in this pandemic, and every country is different. Look, a good friend of mine, Brett Graham at the Ledbury, announced just last week that it was more than likely that he was going to be closing the Ledbury permanently. And I think that
devastating.
Yeah, I think that decision obviously didn't come lightly. That's again, his life's work really. The Ledbury, he's been at it for as long as I've been at Quay, and I think I think the decision was made because the restaurant itself is quite small. and I don't think there was any chance of meeting the criteria of social distancing for some time to come. So he had to make that call. That's a really hard call, such a hard call. But I know Brett, and I know his determination, and he's one of the most energetic, enthusiastic, and passionate people in this industry. He'll be back with something else for sure, without a doubt. I think the industry is very resilient, and I think chefs around the world, are going to find a way back, depending on the different situations they're in. But you can't keep. I don't think you can keep creativity, and I don't think you can keep people away from eventually wanting and needing to have that outlet of a restaurant. It is such a big part of our culture in the West. I think that over a certain age, that's where you socialise, is in the restaurants and really beautiful small bars with great food. That is part of our culture, and I don't see that. I don't see that changing forever. It'll come back. It'll come back strong too.
With Quay being, renowned globally and a real destination restaurant for tourists that come to Australia, do you think it'll have an impact on what you do over the next period of time until borders and start opening and planes start flying again?
Yeah, we looked at that, and to be honest, we do have a lot of internationals, but probably not as much as say the European restaurants that rely on sort of internationals. Australia is a fair distance to travel, anyway. So our percentage was probably about 15%, of 15 to 20% of internationals. So not as high as you would think, because also the forward bookings were pretty forward, and I think that a lot of our business actually comes from Australians that have really got something special to celebrate, from a lot of foodies, from business people. I mean, look, there is going to be an impact for sure. But it does actually open up the opportunities for Australians to frequent the restaurants they like Quay and other restaurants where they have maybe had trouble getting into before. I think bookings are going to be a little bit easier to come by. I think Australians are going to have to really love and embrace Australia when it comes to their holidays and tourism for the next foreseeable sort of 12 to 18 months. I mean, international travel will eventually start again, I'm sure, but in the meantime, Australians are going to get out there and see Australia. And, we hope we get a lot more interstate visitors come to Sydney and come to our restaurant. So I think there'll be uptake in other areas that, maybe that we didn't have as much before. I mean, Australians love to travel. I mean, I don't know how many Australians, that I know have planned an overseas holiday, every couple of years or every few years. So when you can't do that, you're going to do something else. So let's hope that happens. I think that's a positive for the Australian tourism industry. We sure as hell need people to get out there and actually go and holiday in Australia and visit the regional areas that are really being devastated. I mean, they had a huge double blow recently with the fires as well as COVID. So, as much as you can personally, if you can get out there and keep the economy going and holiday in Australia, it's vital.
And I guess that's the thing that we kind of take for granted or have forgotten, just how special Australia is and how much of it you can explore and how different it is in different regions.
Oh, absolutely.
And Quay is a very special restaurant. How do you describe it to people? What's so special about Quay?
Well, I think it's the whole package, but obviously the location is really world class. I mean, there's not too many restaurants that sit on one of the most beautiful harbours in the world and have that sort of view. So I think when people come to Quay, it is an occasion. You feel that sort of magnitude of being somewhere quite special. And that's true within the day when the harbour's glistening, or at night with all the lights. And, it is a special feeling. I'll never forget the first time I walked into Quay when I first started there. It was just like, wow, it's super impressive, and it's, I mean, and I think that's part of, sort of why I push so hard, because I've got to meet that with the food. We've got to meet that with the service. We've got to meet those expectations. So it is a complete package. It is the essential big night out, and it's something, I think, if you haven't been, or you haven't been for a while, it's something to remind yourself of, and it is an excuse to get dressed up a little bit. It is, all those things that people like to do every now and then. That is embodied in Quay, I believe.
Has this experience changed you, and what's the positives to come out of it?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a really interesting question, and I think it's certainly made me not take anything for granted. I believe that I've also, like I said before, looked at how important all our connections and relationships are, and I've always felt that, but it makes you want to value those relationships even more. And I think it's also taught me that, and I think it's probably taught the industry that we can be resilient, and there are other ways of looking at things, but also not to give up on your dream, and what you believe and what you do. And I think something like this does make you question everything, but in some respects, I guess it also strengthens your resolve. So I do feel there's positives to come out of this. Look, I also think that, when people realise that it felt like the world was falling apart, that we actually, I think our government stepped up really well. I think most Australians did the right thing, and we did it with pretty good spirit. I mean, I think the very first couple of weeks were pretty scary for everyone, and I think you can forgive some of the excesses there. But overall, I think we've done very well.
Yeah, and I think, as you sort of mentioned, it's the special moments in life that we're really cherishing now, and we need, special occasion things, and restaurants like Quay, our society needs, because it allows us to forget all of our woes for a moment and just enjoy the good things in life.
Yeah, you do. I was just thinking, doing something like going to a restaurant like Quay, you just step into a different world for a moment, and you can forget your troubles, and there is something special about that. We like to say we're in the business of creating memories, and I think that's sort of our role.
Well, I've got lots of memories from Quay, and I hope to obtain more of them in the future. I would really loved having you join us today, Pete, and apologies for our first interaction 20 years ago.
I can't even remember that, to be honest, mate.
Well, good. I'll let it go too now. Look, I look forward to catching up with you again, but really appreciate chatting today, and keep in touch, and we'll talk soon.
Okay. Cheers, Anthony. Thanks, mate.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.